Hello and welcome to a new episode of Fundraisers on Film, where this week me and Emma are talking about horror films, horror genre. This is part one. We're going through the decades. We have just literally decided that we're going to do it through the decades.
Literally
So there we
three
go.
minutes ago.
Literally 3 minutes ago. We're going to talk about horror films through the decades because I think that's actually a good way of doing it because each decade has its own sort of style and it develops obviously through the decades and through the years. So that's what we're going to do. So this is the first part of that, and we're going to do this last decade. We're going to do 2010s. So we've picked two films that we do like.
Yeah.
We did look through the list of films that have come through the decades. Again, literally 5 minutes ago, and we're astounded and aghast at all the films that we're that came out in the 2010s. It was a good year a good decade for horror.
Yeah. It had a real kind of variety, I think, to it that you forget. Like we were just saying, some of those films we were like, oh, I thought they came out in the 90s, or I thought that came out last year, and then you realise actually, 2010 was a whole 10-year decade. So there you go.
So as this is the first part of our horror look through, so we'll give a little bit of an overview of horror and why we like it so much. So Emma, do you want to start? Why you love horror films so much, or what you see in a horror film, what you look for?
Yeah, like I suppose horror isn't my like go-to genre, but I think when I have this weird kind of relationship with horror films in that I find it really hard to find a horror film that I love, and so I'm always kind of like sort of seeking out new horror films to try and sort of kind of experience those wonderful horror movie experiences that you have, like the first time, I mean, spoiler alert, but the first time you watch like Psycho, the first time that you see like The Thing, like how that makes you feel, like so I kind of have this weird relationship with horror as a genre where I'm just kind of like always trying to like seek it out. In terms of sort of what I look for, I like, I love kind of sort of psychological horrors. I always find really interesting, something that has a good twist at the end. But then also I like horror films that kind of that do the unexpected. I suppose I don't look for anything sort of really specific in terms of like it's got to have ghosts or something like that.
Yeah, it's got to have ghosts.
It's got to have ghosts. If it doesn't have ghosts, then it ain't even a horror film. But I think I don't know where I went with that accent. I apologise in advance. That was horrific. So I don't really have kind of like a go-to genre. I think the one thing I really, as I've got older particularly, I've discovered that I can't deal with is when like I think we've spoken about this before, but when in horror films they like isolate a person and do something gratuitously violent to them. So example, Bone Tomahawk, the scene where just had to turn off, couldn't deal with it. And
I think I know which scene. Is it? Yeah.
There's one scene in the cave with the guy. I still have nightmares about that scene, and it's been a long time, and it was like a really visceral response. I'm just like, no, and so that's definitely a new thing, because when I was younger, like I used to love very gory, horrendous films, and as I've got older, my belly and my heart can't deal with them. So that's the only thing I would actively say I avoid in. So like Midsummer, I still haven't seen Midsummer because a part of me is really worried that I'm going to experience the trauma from Bone Tomahawk.
Yeah.
I rewatched it and was like, right, this is going to be horrible. Just deal with it. I'd probably be fine. I think it was the shock of it, and now I've built it up too big in my head.
Yeah, I don't think you realise where it's going with Bone Tomahawk. It just sort of it sort of happens,
It just
and you don't.
happens.
It just
Yeah.
happens, and it's not what you expected. And yeah, Bone Tomahawk is actually really good. Other than
I
that,
know
that
that
is
everyone raves about it, and it was really good up until that point. And then I was like, I just can't deal with it. And now I have nightmares about it.
yeah. If people haven't seen Bone Tomahawk, I think throughout this podcast and this sub series of like podcasts that we're going to do, we'll probably throw in some horror films that we would say, yeah, go watch it. I would recommend Bone Tomahawk. Yeah, I would say go and watch it.
Careful.
Yeah, be
Comes with
careful.
a warning.
It,
If you don't like gore,
yeah, it's
maybe
really. It sort of
be
reminded me
prepared.
of not in the way that it was unexpected, but like Green Inferno, the Eli Roth.
Seen Green Inferno.
Well,
Is it?
it's something not you expect that to happen in Green Inferno because of what it's about. It's about cannibal holocaust sort of film.
Okay.
So you expect that to happen, but it's very it's like, oh no, oh yeah, that's really.
I think the thing is as well is like when you watch those kind of films that what I don't know what that subgenre is called, but it's just like exploitation, kind of gratuitous, extreme horror. I think most of them are packaged, whether it's in the marketing of the film or just in the general kind of people chatting word of mouth communications around the film. You are somewhat prepared. So like I've, very weirdly, I watched like Cannibal Holocaust just before one of the exams because I just had a couple of hours to kill. And I was like, let's just watch Cannibal Holocaust. But I knew what I was setting myself up for. Like I knew it was going to be very violent and very not unsatisfying, uncomfortable, to watch. But I had to just sort of prep myself for it. I was like, it's a film and it's going to be horrible, but that's okay. Whereas with Bone Tomahawk, when I saw it, that definitely wasn't the kind of conversation that was going around the film. And it was like, oh, this is just a great film about, a guy kind of wandering through the desert and then he meets these other guys and they're a bit crazy. It's like, no, they're not. They're not crazy. They eat people. They definitely are more than just a bit, bit eccentric.
Yeah, Bone Tomahawk. Yeah, I did enjoy it. It was on one of the. It's on you get these lists on YouTube and like shocking horror moments, and it goes through the list, and then it mentions like Bone Tomahawk. Like, really, it's a western, and then no, it's not western. It's horrific western.
True grit. True grit is what you're looking for, not Bone Tomahawk.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's a bit true British in the sense that you have that LeBoeuf character with Matthew Fox. He's sort of like that, and it does have inflections of true grit in there, but it's not true grit. It's really not true grit.
It couldn't be further from true grit.
Yeah, but it is good, so people should watch it. Anyway, yeah. So
what do you, and how about you? What do you kind of look for or avoid, or
I always. I never used to like horror before going to university. I couldn't handle it. It's like going to the cinema watching a horror film. I was like, no, I'm not doing it. No, it's not doing it. No. And when I was in university, they dedicated a whole semester to horror, like the whole genre, just on horror. And like through university, we'd done like classic cinema and other types of cinema, but not like a specific genre. So you got to, talk about the nuances of it, the subtext, all sort of the intricacies of horror. And it really got me into it a lot more because I sort of understood it more and I enjoyed it. So, and it also forced myself to watch the horror films as well. So from there, I really enjoyed it. Now, there are some that I actively avoid. Your ghost impression? Yeah, I don't particularly like ghost films, really. I'm not a big into that. I always remember watching, going to the cinema watching Grudge, J-horror. J-horror is not for me. It's like, like the remake with the Sarah Michelle Gellar.
Yes.
Oh, no, that was a proper freaky film. There was a remake of that recently, so I've not watched that
I was
either.
going to say, there was that kind of like period, maybe that was like 2010s, where there was this huge influx of like Asian horror that was just remade in American, like, so I think it's a lot of it started with The Ring and the success of The Ring, and then everything fell out of that, didn't it, really, or fell, carried on from that. But yeah, it's I know what you mean.
No. But yeah, so Ghost Ones was never really one that, like the supernatural ghost stories. I mean, but saying that, I really enjoyed when I got around to watching it, like Paranormal Activity. I really enjoyed watching that. Not because I think the first two I actually really enjoyed, but watching the first one for the first time, you sat and you just like watching the screen and like little door moves, and then
just a really micro movement.
Just a little micro movement. But it was done really, really well, and then obviously as it got more and more progressive, and obviously that has like the Blair Witch influence in there of the the steady cam, the lost footage, found footage, whichever you want to describe it. And I always remember enjoying watching that. But yeah, horrors. Yeah, I've enjoyed a lot more horror in the past 10 to 15 years because I kind of understand it a bit more, I think, and I thank university for that. Yes, I thank university.
So we always used to. I think we've had this conversation before. My kind of relationship with horror started really early on. Props to my former stepsister, who allowed me and at the time I must have been like 8, maybe younger, 7 or 8, and my sister, who was about 5 or 6, allowed us to watch Psycho while she was babysitting us, because she was too busy with her boyfriend and accidentally misread the TV guide as physio. So she thought we were watching a 2-hour film about physiotherapy, I suggest. But when my mum came home and found me and my sister quite traumatized in the living room, but that was the first sort of horror film that I remember watching. And then from that, my uncle, who was totally my kind of guru into cinema, he used to have this brilliant format where we would watch a horror film and then we would watch like a funny, I don't think this is unique to us, I think lots of people do it, and then we would watch a really funny film afterwards. So it was always like scary film like Scream, and then you would watch like Wayne's World, or you would watch like Blair Witch Project, and then you would watch The Mask. In all fairness, it was mainly just Dumb and Dumber, Scream, Dumb and Dumber, The Mask, and Wayne's World, which is why I knew them word for word through most of my teenage years. But it's but yeah, so I think that's why I've always liked sort of horror films. But I'm definitely a massive scaredy cat. Like I think stay on my mind for weeks afterwards.
Yeah, I'll admit I'm a bit of a scaredy cat, and some of my friends will probably agree with me, because if they're listening to this, they'll be like, "Yeah, you used to sit there with your headphones in watching some of these films." Yeah, I don't care. Yeah, I do not care. Some of that, especially Grudge, I distinctly remember going, "No, this is not for me." Because I remember as well when we went to the cinema and we all went to watch Signs together. So it was like 11 of us in a row, and we was actually. Every year Signs was, I think we were in year 9, year 10, and the scene where the alien walks out and the whole road just went just all popcorn, the whole thing, and it was a great experience. I mean, finding a good horror film that you absolutely thoroughly enjoy and love, and you get that jolt of a good scare or that. It's a roller coaster.
That's what I literally was about to say. And I mean, I absolutely hate roller coasters. I cannot stand them. They make me feel really sick. So I'm the bad lady. But I find that with cinema, like if you're watching like a really good horror film, I love that feeling, like you get it in theatre as well, right? With The Woman in Black and Ghost Stories. And I love that feeling of like genuinely being in a room where everyone's like petrified or on the edge of their seat, like the tension, you could like slice it out of the air in front of you and take it away and put it in your pocket or whatever. Like I really like that feeling. I think that kind of exposure to being like safe but very scared is quite, there's something in it I think that I like. But then I have to watch Wayne's World afterwards.
But horror, I mean, horror itself is like a genre it's one of the cornerstones of cinema. I mean, you can go back to the 1920s where there was adaptation, German expressionists with Nosferatu, one of the
Cabinet Dr. Caligari.
Cabinet Doctor, yeah. The Germans love the horror.
That's our, I was going to say, that's our like 1920s horror section done though, isn't it? No?
Yeah, that's it. That's probably that. M, maybe you can throw M in there. Maybe. What's the other one as well?
Totally.
What's the other one? It's not Metropolis. No,
yeah,
no, it's not.
Metropolis isn't really a horror film, but you mean the Fritz Lang film?
Yeah, the Fritz Lang film. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. There's that one as well, but then you go into the 1930s and that. But horror as well can be as highbrow mainstream as you can get, and it could be as lowbrow, cheap, nasty, horrible as you can get, and it ranges, and that's the scope. And I think that's what's great about horror. You can find there's something for everyone in horror. There really is. Yeah. So, and we hope that we can part some. We've already nominated a couple of films just in that intro.
We're so bad at like sticking to just like the films we're meant to be talking about. It's like, oh my god, and this film, and have you seen this film? And I'm going to actually add, if you haven't seen Ghost Stories is brilliant. I really enjoyed Ghost Stories.
Yeah,
it's so I really enjoyed it. And it's got a great, lovely British cast. Andy Nyman as well. I thought it was so good.
Martin Freeman's in there as well, isn't he? He's always in everything.
Paul Whitehouse, a weird like rebirthing of Paul Whitehouse that no one's seen since the late 90s, early 2000s. But
it's a good film. Good ending. Good ending.
Yeah, it is really good. I went and saw the stage show as well, and it's equally as good. It's freaky. It's really freaky. But yeah, I think that there's, like you've said, it's just there's such a huge scope with horror films, and it's so kind of subjective. I definitely sit with my partner and watch horror films, and he doesn't like watching them with me, in all fairness, because I make him jump by grabbing him because I'm petrified, and so we don't really watch jumpy horror films together that often. But what he finds scary, yeah, pretty much. I'm like, but what he finds scary versus what I find scary are just so different. Like, and he doesn't respond to kind of like scare tactics, like the bangs and the kind of like jumps on screen. Whereas I definitely do. But he'll find kind of the things that you don't see more, like when you're allowed to kind of run with your own imagination. That's when it becomes more interesting. But that's why I think we've spoken about it. It's not technically a film, but like that's why I really loved like Hill House and stuff like that, because it had something for both of us. Like it definitely had the jump scares in it, because I still have nightmares about them. But
in the car, maybe.
Oh my gosh! I swear, I screamed louder than anyone in that car. But then the amount of little hidden kind of ghosts that you have in the background, and they have their own narrative, right? But you don't see them half the time. So I think that horror is a really accessible genre, in that, let's face it, most student films start off with horror.
I mean, you see all the directors that have come through horror that have done a horror film and then gone on to make, big budget blockbusters. Horror is seen as like a trash throwaway genre, but it's really not. It's really not. Yeah, I suppose it is.
Like Roger, like famous kind of Roger Corman sort of film school, they called it, but he just made loads of B movies, and he brought in lots of directors straight out of like New York Film School. And so, he worked with like Martin Scorsese, he worked with George Lucas, like all of these like massive directors to us now. But at the time, they were just students coming out of NYU, New York Film School, and just wanted to kind of dip their toe in the water. And he just happened to do like these kind of freaky B movies. So I think, like you said earlier, like because of the kind of different stylistic approaches of horror, you can come in at a really low, gritty, no budget kind of end, or you can go, you know, all the way up to kind of CGIing spaceships and I don't know, weird and wonderful things, and spending millions of pounds on.
Weird and wonderful arty ones. And there are a few of them. I mean, we was looking at some of the films that have come out in 2010 because that's the decade we're going to talk about. So just looking on Google, and there are so many. So there's like The Witch, The Shallows.
I like that. I liked The Witch. I thought it was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. One that we talked about, well, we didn't talk about, but we did mention it before the podcast last week, was Lights Out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Emma saw the little 2-minute film that's based on. What were your thoughts on that?
Since, well, insight into my life, I sleep with the lights on now. It was good. I really liked it. Do you know what? I preferred it to the film, if I'm honest. I felt like it was much more succinct. And they were a bit more fun with it. The film took itself quite seriously. But yeah, like, and that's literally what we were just saying about kind of like starting up, you know, as a filmmaker, like 2-minute horrors, super achievable. But I did like myself. I thought the idea was very clever. And yeah, even now my partner will be like, turn the lights off and be like, oh, is that Diana? And then I can't sleep. So there you go. That's the trauma that I live with.
Oh dear. So you had the 2 Conjurings. You got A Quiet Place, Raw. I've not seen that. The Slender Man. Ooh, no thanks. Don't Breathe, Sinister. There's so many. Devil. That was an interesting one. You haven't seen that either.
No, I haven't seen Devil. I did see. Did you see The Boy though?
That was on. It's on Netflix, isn't it? I've not seen that one.
It might be. I haven't. I might be on Netflix. It was. I can't think what year it came out. Maybe 2016 or something. And it's the story of like an American nanny who comes over to look after. It's like an au pair in this like British house. Very like lovely, beautiful kind of country house. But when she gets there, she discovers that the young boy is a doll. It's like a porcelain 20s doll thing. But actually, though there was definitely bits that I could have, you know, lived without seeing, it was quite clever, like, because there are, you know, what feels like paranormal elements to it, and then it all sort of like unravels. But I really enjoyed that. I thought it was quite fun and something a bit different. Yeah, like I say, I always really struggle with horror films. Finding good ones, so like.
It's the porcelain doll bit. You lost me there. I can't. I remember going, no, porcelain dolls, no. I went to, when I was very, very young, about 2 or 3, the whole family went to Anglesey for like staying in a cottage and that, and I was supposed to stay with my nan at the time, up in this room. I remember it distinctly, going up these stairs, and it was the only room in the cottage that was upstairs. And as soon as you walked in the door, there was a porcelain doll sat there looking at you. And I scraped the place down, and I did not stay in that room. So ever since then, not for me.
I mean, porcelain dolls, I think that's probably why they've used them in the film, because they are very freaky, like really freaky.
It's that uncanny horror, isn't it? As the Germans say, it's unheimlich, is what we was described in the horror. In university, it was the uncanny nature of likeness and twins, and that's how it's used in horror.
Yeah,
because it is.
Isn't it like Uncanny Valley, that kind of vibe?
Yeah. Like deja vu, mirror images, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, things that look like humans that aren't quite.
Yeah. You kind of. Well, this is where like pareidolia plays like such a huge part in horror films, isn't it? Because it's something that, you know, that kind of, when we've all probably done it, you see a mark on the wall and you're like, that looks like a face, because you're all the clouds, when you look up the sky you see a donkey or whatever it might be, and it's because your brain naturally wants to create something recognizable or a pattern or whatever it might be of what it's seeing that it doesn't understand. And I think horror movies play on that a lot, like with shadows, with kind of noises even, you know. I think if you think about things like Most Haunted, or, you know, they always used to caption noises because they wanted you to hear it a certain way, but actually if you remove it, half the time he didn't say
yeah. Nothing there.
He said, "Let me out." No, he didn't.
Yeah.
But then also 2010 you saw, the 2010, so it was later, 2019 you saw the rebirth of It. So
Yes.
was that It 2 was 2019 though, actually, I think.
Yeah. 2017 was It 1, which we talked about on here, because, well, didn't we? Both enjoyed it. Both enjoyed it very much.
It was good. And then, yeah, like as we were saying before, you had Kill List. It was such a great kind of year for variety.
Yeah, and I think coming out of the 2000s, where it was, again, I don't think we're going to talk about the 2000s in this podcast. I don't, maybe not.
We should.
Okay,
I think
well,
we should.
maybe we will.
I think there'll be some hidden gems.
Well,
yeah.
We'll have to look hard then.
I can't believe that there would be like no horror film in the whole of the 2000s that neither of us.
To be fair, I think Paranormal Activity was in there.
Yeah.
I think that was in the 2000s. But then we're coming out of what was Saw 2000 and Hostel 5 or whatever. There was that very much of just like you were saying before about Bone Tomahawk, that just horribleness that was the touch porn, and it was coming into, so the 2010s was coming out of that, and then you got this birth of very smart, very clever horror films like Hereditary, for example, which was very different to what's been before. You had more social commentary horror that we're going to talk about very soon with Get Out and Us, and that has spawned off a load of other films like Ma as well. I've not seen it, but I think that's sort of on that way. And I think there's another one on Netflix now that is in similar vein to the likes of Get Out and Us. I think there's something called Annabella or something similar, but that's on Netflix as well. So it spawned that sort of movement as well. So, and as well, you had James Wan's likes of Sinister and Insidious and the Conjuring universe. So you had all these, like you were saying before, the quite bang horror films, which some people don't like. Mark Commode famously said that they are horror films for non-horror fans, but I quite enjoy them. They do a job and they're quite enjoyable for what they are. So
yeah, I think you just got to find what works for you, right? You've got to find what you enjoy. And I definitely think, and hopefully through this podcast, people explore new types of cinema and new sort of genres of film. But yeah, it isn't one size fits all. And, you know, definitely people don't always agree with, you know, my recommendations. I recommended Drive to someone once and they were like, you made me watch a guy sat in a car for 2 hours. That's
really good. The only film, I know, tangents, we're going off on one, but the only film that I wouldn't recommend to anybody that has Ryan Gosling in is Only God Forgives. G. Wilkers.
Oh.
No.
Yeah, that was really weird, but if you enjoy cinematography, beautifully shot.
Yeah, okay.
I loved the colours and the way it was kind of composed, but yeah, I see what you mean, like in terms of the content. But also, you might just want to put it on mute and just watch Ryan Gosling. Just walk around for a little while. Maybe.
It could have just been a silent movie and then just watch the images go by.
You just watch. I feel the same with The Notebook, though, in all fairness. It probably would have been better if it was just silent. That's going to be controversial. Expect to hate now. So,
I haven't seen it.
People.
Yeah, anyway. With some proper horror, not The Notebook.
And do you want to start with the first film that we're going to talk about?
Yeah, do you want to play rock, paper, scissors? Decide who goes first?
Yes.
Okay, so here we go.
Okay, ready?
Yeah. One,
One, two.
two,
Wait,
three.
we can't even count in order.
It's
What
the
do we
lag.
start? So one, 1, 12, 9. No, sorry. 1, 2,
Well,
3.
there you
3.
go.
Reveal.
Oh, I go
All right.
first.
Mark
Okay.
has scissors. I have paper.
I think that was paper. So, so the
I don't know what
the first film we're going to talk about from the 2010s that I sort of recommended Emma to watch because Emma hadn't seen It Follows.
Yeah.
I should have been a pair of ragged claws, scuttling across the floors of silent seas. And the afternoon, the evening, sleeps so peacefully, smoothed by long fingers, asleep, tired, or it malingers, stretched out on the floor, here beside you and me. Should I, after tea and cakes and ices, have the strength to force the moment to its crisis? But though I have wept and fasted, wept and prayed, though I have seen my head grown slightly bald, brought in upon a platter, I am no prophet, and here's no great matter. I have seen the moment of my greatness flicker, and I have seen the eternal footman hold my coat and snicker. And in short, I was afraid. And would it have been worth it after all? After the cups, the marmalade, the tea, among the porcelain, among some talk of you and me, would it have been worthwhile to have bitten off the matter with a smile, to have squeezed the universe into a ball, to roll it towards some overwhelming question, to say, I am Lazarus, come from the dead, come back to tell you all. I shall tell you all of one settling a pillow by the to say, that is not what I need at all. That is not it at all. Excuse me. Excuse me.
Yeah, so It Follows. I want to get IMDb up because I can't remember who directs it. Excuse me.
David Robert Mitchell.
I don't.
Wasn't it? I thought David Robert Mitchell directed It Follows because he wrote it as well, didn't he?
I'm pretty sure whoever did it only did one. So it was 2014, and it was David Robert Mitchell. See, my co-host knows this better than I do, and she only watched it the other day. But the film follows, for those who haven't seen it, the film follows a young woman who is followed by an unknown supernatural force after her very first sexual encounter. And it stars. Hang on. Sorry, it stars Micah Monroe as Jay, and she is the girl which this unknown supernatural entity is following her around. And I remember my friend, he recommended this to me. It must have been a couple of years after it had come out. I said, you should watch this. It's really good. I was like, oh, okay, they're fine. Yeah, okay. You know, you get recommendations, and sometimes you follow them through, sometimes you don't. You're like, yeah, I watched that. It was really good. Yeah. But with It Follows, I did watch it, and I did enjoy it. And I think the first thing that we could say about it is it's the theme in the themes is what I'm looking for. The themes is about that first sexual encounter that people have, and the way that it is built up. I think for girls, and especially in cinema, the way that it is portrayed and, like I say, built up, is it's supposed to be like this perfect, amazing experience that they're going to remember forever. And what happens with Jay is what?
Well, it ends up just being sex in the back of a car in a derelict building, near a derelict building, and then if that's not romantic enough, he then knocks you out and ties you to a chair in your underwear.
Yeah,
it sounds like most people's first sexual experience, if you ask me.
Yeah.
Very common.
Yeah, very, very common.
It's so surreal. Like, it's really, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I totally thought the whole film was just like an allegory for STDs. I don't know if that was just me though. I just went all the way through.
No, I think it definitely was just an allegory for STDs. Yeah.
It's just she's a dirty, sexy demon that's following all these poor teenagers around and will eventually kill them, like a lot of STDs, sadly. Yeah, it was, like I say, like you just said, sorry, I literally had never seen it before. I hadn't really even heard of it until you mentioned it. I do think it was an interesting film. Like, it's something quite different, and it's quite shocking, I suppose. Not in the sense that there's anything particularly like gratuitous, but
no, there's nothing like that. Nothing as shocking as Bone Tomahawk in there.
No, definitely not as anything as or Saw or anything like that. But like, I think maybe it's just because we're British. Like, there's that kind of like, oh gosh, you don't talk about that. You just turn.
Yes, I think that is
That's something. But you know, I think it's a really interesting subject for a horror film. Like, and this whole like, you can't see it until you're like infected, and then it just follows you until you just pass it on to someone else and hope that person passes on to someone else and keeps going and going and going and going. There were lots of questions that I had, I think, off the back of it, like a bit too much information. But what happens if there was more than two people engaging in the act? Which one would the ghost choose? Can it split? Can it follow two people at the same time? What if there's, you know, I mean, we could go down that rabbit hole, but it's I did enjoy it. Like, I thought you can definitely see like the influences from other films. Like, the end was so, you know, what was the film? Let the Right One In. The final scene all around the swimming pool really reminded me of that.
It's a bit ambiguous, the ending, because he wasn't sure if the thing was following at the end. He was like, is that because that if you looked at the background, there was somebody following them, and like, and I think that sort of just let that image sit there quite well, because you thought, did they really beat it, or is that behind them? So I like an ambiguous ending.
Yeah, and all the way through the film, you sort of see them trying to work out how to kill it, but they're not actually. They shoot it once, and then the other time they try to electrocute it in the swimming pool. So you don't really know.
Yeah, you nobody knows if, but that's what the ending did, wasn't it? It did sort of leave it out there that maybe not, that it's still coming for them by this person following, because they didn't know. It could have been anybody. This thing following them could have been anybody. It could have been anybody at any other time. And throughout the film, at times, I remember like the scene on the beach where it changed shape like 2 or 3 times. It was a little boy, and it was an old woman, and it was an old man, and it was something else, and it kept changing every time the camera went off the thing, or whatever it was. It changed form, which I thought was like really quite clever sort of thing, because it basically said it could have been anybody. And I think the thing about what it was is that it never ran. It never
something more sort of sinister in that, isn't it? Just slowly stalking you. And actually, did we explain why? You know, so it's obviously stalking her because she had like sex with the guy who was stalking before. Yeah, it's that like kind of slow, drudging, always eventually catch up with you.
It's that shadow that's always there's a shadow that's lurking over you. And there's scenes where she's in the foreground, but the thing's in the background, which I always thought that then.
The scene where they drive off and the thing is a naked guy stood on the roof.
Yes. It's just waiting there.
I watched it and I was like, one, also it really confused me because it really reminded me of the cover of the Coen Brothers Serious Man film, like the way he was just stood on the roof, but obviously in that film he's dressed, and he definitely wasn't dressed. But I was like, they were in the house. How many rooms did he climb, like, or windows or doors did he climb past that they were in to get into to get onto the roof?
Well, we're assuming that she would have seen it because nobody else can see it except her.
Yeah, no, only yeah. Okay, so maybe but why would it not just come for her? Why did it just climb onto the roof?
I think it's probably saying that I'm always here, sort of thing. Like I've not forgot about you. I'm watching you. I think,
and I'm here on the roof in the net.
Yeah, just here, just standing free. But it reminds me.
No one else can see me. It's fine.
Yeah, no one else can see. Yeah, it's fine. Only you can see me like this. It's like, but that slow creeping, let me say, it's trudging towards them. It has this stir, this like a goal that you're it. I'm going to get you because it walks through people, over things. It doesn't matter what's in the way, it's going to just come in. It's that ever-ending or that never-ending cycle of I'm coming for you. But we was talking before the last podcast, if you remember, about the story that you told me about the person in the home and people being chased.
Yes. Definitely caused a few nightmares. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It was that idea of I think that it's very clever in that, that the constantly being stalked is one element that kind of keeps you on edge. But I also like the fact that, so if you pass it on to someone else, if that person then dies, it comes back to you. So though they don't quite explore it in the film, but they definitely could have, I guess if you had more time, look at passing it on a bit and then watching those people, and then you don't know it's come back for you because all of those other people, that was a thing that I did like. They didn't kind of explore that much, but I like the idea that actually you could think you're fine because you've slept with everyone that you can think of, but actually as those people start becoming victims or dying, that monster or that demon or whatever it is then is starting to edge its way back to you. Also, who is patient zero? Who's that person?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I do quite enjoy. What I like about it is that it is sort of, like you say, a bit ambiguous as to, well, what is it? Where is it? Where does it come from? And it never really explores that. It's a bit like that Alien, a bit like Alien, where it just happenstance that it's like this meeting of just a crossroads where they find the alien and then it just jumps to this next person. Whereas in It Follows. It's sort of similar in the fact that it just happened to be her that this is happening to. It could have been anybody else. It just so happens to be you. And it follows, obviously it starts to follow her, but they never really follow into, like you're saying, the backstory of where that came from. I mean, they went back and found him, but then they never went and found her and then him and then her, like you're saying. Well, so it just seems to be like happenstance again.
The guy that obviously infects her, he is a sneaky bugger, and he obviously, when they first try and find him, it works out that he'd used like a fake name. He'd rented an apartment under a fake name so that she couldn't trace him. So I suppose there's always that element, is that actually maybe people are going to be, the person that he then got it off, he mentions about meeting her in a bar and it being a one-night stand, he didn't even remember her name, I'm guessing that the point of those few kind of backstories that you do hear is that people are always trying to do it in a really covert, not to tie their name to it, because I guess you don't want it coming back to you in a literal way, like someone knocking on your door being like, oi, you and I hooked up that time, now this weird woman is sort of all the time, she just won't stop, do you want to explain? I do feel like when it happens, obviously when after they sleep together and then he very romantically ties her to a wheelchair in an abandoned building in nothing but her pants, like he could have put clothes on her, he's then not very like, I would have very clear instructions, because the goal is you want that person to survive, right? You don't want them to die.
You want them,
So I'd be like, right, these are the very clear instructions. You need to go and find someone who sleeps around. Go and sleep with that person. You can't do this, you can't. But it was like, they're slow, but they're not stupid. Give me examples, Hugh, whatever his name is, I can't remember what his name is, but I need examples. When you say they're not stupid, what do you mean? Like they can't do maths? Or do you mean like they, no, I don't know. I can't think of an example, but I need more concrete examples. I can't deal with cryptids.
I think his point at that point was, we've not got time for this. I need to go.
They could have had time if he didn't put her in this really ridiculous, vulnerable position in the middle of he could have been like, okay, taking her for dinner afterwards, that would have been nice. Take her for dinner. I know he took her for dinner before, but a second dinner, that would be lovely in my books. Second dinner, FYI, now we've done the deed and I've bought you 2 meals in a day. Now's the bad news. The bad news is that you've been stalked until you're murdered by a weird demon thing. So we're just going to talk through the practicalities of that. And I'm like, you know what? Annoyed, but I appreciate that you've taken the time to take me for 2 dinners.
Maybe it was the case of that he wouldn't believe her. Maybe that's what it was, and he had to tie it to a chair to show that this thing was following her all the way. But the thing about that at that point is that they seen it, like they were like 6, 7 floors up, and they seen it coming up. But then it was just there on the top floor. It's like, oh, so it can climb stairs very quickly.
Climb stairs at an exponential rate. It's weird how, as like, obviously only the infected person can see the ghost, but then it can damage physical, real world objects. So like it smashes windows, it lifts things, and other people can see it lifting, like the thing moving kind of on its own accord almost, like you would see in like a horror, like a paranormal horror film, like chairs being thrown around, hair being pulled and stuff like that, but only the infected person can see the actual ghost. But actually, can we also talk about in the opening scene that the young girl who's like walking in the middle of a suburban neighborhood, sort of backwards, in very little clothing, very short shorts, stiletto heels, and like a cami top, obviously very distressed, looking at something that isn't there. And her neighbour's like, are you all right? And she's like, yeah, no, I'm fine. And they're like, okay, yeah, that's fine. You have a nice day. What? Like, it's like a young woman who's quite clearly not okay. She's running around in circles away from something that no one can see. I would be a little bit more concerned. I don't feel like that woman was concerned enough. And that dispirits me.
No, potentially not. But we was talking about this before the pod as well, that there was no parents around. It was very there was nobody around. The kids had free reign, and we were saying as well that it did feel like a bit of an 80s film. The soundtrack as well was very like 80s and infused, and it had an 80s feel. And I think going back to like the topic, the theme itself of the first times night, it did sort of feel like an 80s, like a horrific 80s like teen rom-com sort of film where, like I said, it was going to be like this magical time, but actually it really isn't. It's quite horrific, and now this thing's going to stalk you. So it's sort of like that horrible tale, that horrible take on that instance. But also it has like the buddy film in there as well, because all her friends follow her, and they a bit like the Goonies, I suppose, in that instance. Yeah,
completely. It's like the kind of the collective of friends who sort of stick together, don't need adults. And in this instance, these guys definitely needed adults' help, but seemingly kind of could just sort it out themselves. But also, like, you talk about kind of the feel. Actually, there were a lot of kind of props in the film that were very 80s, like in her bedroom. So like in the scene where she sees the demon thing breaking into the neighbor's house, who she's passed her disease onto, and she picks up the phone, and it's a cord phone, like it's the phone has a wire to it. But then in the next scene, you've got her friend on that weird clamshell
e-reader thing.
And that's what I was saying earlier, like I just couldn't work out when I was like, all the films they watch, they go to the cinema to watch charade, they're watching like old films,
black and white,
together.
like monster movies,
with their friends, or you know, as a group. But then it's really sort of, there's no
date to it.
Time. No,
it doesn't have the Stranger Things, or like we were talking about, it doesn't have that nostalgia back to it.
No, it's definitely, it just doesn't allow you to sort of get it's very difficult to kind of perceive what era you're in. It's very kind of confusing, but maybe that's part of it, is that to sort of make you feel a little bit disorientated. You can't latch onto anything and identify it in one way or another. But I thought it was, like I said, I thought it was like a really interesting approach, and it's not something that I've seen before
for a while. There's been there was like we talk about the 80s sort of feel and sort of feel of the film. Well, you know, back in the 80s there was the AIDS scare as well, so maybe that's what it was, you know, trying to hark back to, because like The Thing was sort of an AIDS fear as well, with the way that the blood was transferred and that. So maybe it was looking back at, or you know, trying to get that feeling into the film, maybe. So maybe that was what it was going for. But like I say, we can't. It doesn't say September 2016 or whatever. It never says anything like that. It never dates itself. But we had cordless phones and e-readers. So
there's cues that you normally come to. I mean, films don't always need to have like definitive dates, but usually you'll find in cinema there's like cues as to round about where you are, and this film just didn't have any of that. Like, or it had cues for the 80s, then cues for the 90s, then cues for 2030, then cues for like so you were kind of going all over the place. But again, like, it's not criticism. Like, I think it's kind of interesting. Like, I've never I kind of found myself confused by it, and maybe that was the point.
Maybe. So that was It Follows. So that was 2014. If you haven't seen it, we were again before the pod. We have a lot. We talk more about before the pod than we get it in the thing. So before the podcast.
The time before.
I forgot what I was going to say before the podcast, but it's completely slipped my mind. I don't know. I was going to say something, but it mustn't have been that important. Anyway, moving on.
It'll come to you after the podcast.
Yeah, it'll come to after the podcast.
The time after the podcast.
Yeah, the time after.
So
moving
next
on is your choice. And what was your choice from the 2010s?
So my choice from 2017 actually is Jordan Peele's Get
Nielsen
Out.
and Elisa.
Hey, how you doing?
So, how handsome is he? Are you handsome?
Okay.
Oh, not bad. Hey, Nielsen. So, is it true? Is it better? Wow.
Fair skin has been in favor for the past, couple of hundreds of years. But now the pendulum is swung back. Black is in fashion.
Pardon me, I'm gonna take some pictures.
Sure thing.
There it is.
Good to see another brother around here.
Yes, of course it is. Something wrong?
There you are. Do something with this.
Yes, yes.
Oh, hello. I'm Philomena, and you are
Chris, Rose's boyfriend.
fantastic. You two make a lovely couple.
Thanks.
Where are my manners? Logan King. Chris was just telling me how he felt much more comfortable with my being here.
That's nice. Logan, I hate to tear you away, dear, but the Wincuts were asking about you.
Well, it was nice to meet you, Chris. Goodbye.
For winning, will I add?
For winning,
Get Out.
yes.
For winning. So Get Out follows
The Oscar-winning Daniel
the
Kaluuya.
Oscar-winning. Sorry, I just can't move over the fact that it's Oscar-winning. So Get Out follows Chris and his girlfriend Rose. Chris played by the amazing, recently re-Oscar-winning Daniel Kaluuya. So it follows Chris and Rose as they kind of go to meet Rose's parents for the very first time, and upon arrival at Rose's family home, there starts to be some sort of unease. You're already feeling quite early on that something's not quite right. Some of that is in the fact that Chris is the only black person in there, in the house. Everyone else is white, with the exception of another kind of black guy who is very, very strange, who's just not acting how Chris would kind of expect him to act. And then
There's the housemaid as well.
And then you meet the house, both the kind of gardener and the housemaid, who, again, there's just, like we were saying earlier about the uncanny valley, they're people, they're real people, you can see them, but there's just something not right. There's something in their micro movements, in the way that they act and engage with people. There's just something not right. And as the film kind of goes on, you learn that Rose is not the lovely, kind of whole, what's the saying, kind of like wholehearted American woman that you think she is. She's actually a ploy to lure in. She's alert. She's luring in these young, predominantly, African American males, but also females, into her home, where her parents, who are, one is a hypnotherapist and one is a neurosurgeon, then hypnotize them, perform this sounds so weird when you're explaining it, performs brain surgery on them and takes their brain out and puts the brain of a white individual,
An old white man,
Usually men, though that obviously the housemaid is a woman, it's their grandmother, but yeah, predominantly men, always white, to allow them, because there's this in the film, it projects this theory that like African American
genealogy,
yeah, like they're bred better, they're going to live longer, they're, you know, all of this kind of beneficial stuff. It's very harky back to, you know, kind of like that horrible like Nazi testing. It's all very kind of reminiscent of that. And yeah, so he then discovers that the plan is to perform a weird, horrible brain swapping surgery on him, and so obviously tries to escape. But it's so, you know, it's very political. It's making a very obvious statement about slave trade, and there's definitely links that you can see really clearly. So things like when he's being so they literally shackle him to a chair so the mum can hypnotize him, and he picks the cotton out of the chair. And that's obviously a reference. Then there's a scene where they're literally auctioning him off while he's not there to the highest bidder, which is obviously again reminiscent to those awful slave sales that used to happen.
We're watching that bit back as well. I distinctly. So I watched it back again today, and that whole sequence where the whole party's happening, and actually watching it back and seeing them go, oh, you're really strong, and do you play golf, and do you and you realise that actually, it's a meat market, and they're sizing him up to buy him as a product. And if you're watching that the first time, without the recall of knowing what's gone before, you probably don't realise that that's going on. But when you watch it back and say, oh, so that's what they were doing.
Yeah, he's a commodity to be sold to the highest bidder, and they, there's things that you pick up in it as well, like you say, just kind of like, oh yeah, he's muscular, and someone even makes a comment asking if he's good in bed, and all of these sort of really inappropriate kind of conversations, but also like how the crowd act. There's that really kind of iconic scene where he goes upstairs and the whole party just stops and they all look up, and it's really eerie, and you already know at that point there's something unusual about the family and that there's something not right happening, but you kind of haven't quite put your finger on it to explicitly at that point. But yes, and then obviously the scene where he takes a photo of the other Andre, who is a guy who you see earlier on in the film being kidnapped.
But he's shoved into a white Porsche.
He's shoved, which is obviously meant to be a metaphor, right, of how like the black individual is shoved into this like white kind of frame, and that's part of the what do they call it? Not the underneath, that's bloody Stranger Things, but the sunken place, right? Yeah. And that's where they go, they just live as like a tiny little person inside the mind of of their white buyer, I guess. I don't know what you would call it. But yeah, I think there's so many of these kind of like little kind of messages and kind of like just clever little motifs, I guess. Even like the spoon that the hypnotist mother kind of stirs the tea with, it's like a very nice silver spoon, and it's meant to be like a metaphor for privilege, right? And she's literally got a silver spoon, and
I didn't pick that up.
I think
but
but it's such a brilliant film. It's so clever, and the thing that actually I like about the film, one of my favorite things is the end. And because with a lot of horror films, it's like you're kind of hit, not physically, but it's like you're hit over and over and over and over. If you think of like any kind of like jump scare film, it's like rah, rah, rah. And so by the time you get to the end, you're like knackered. You're like
exhausted,
oh my gosh, like I need a cup of tea. And the same, you know, with those really gory films where, you know, the protagonist escapes only to end up in another similarly kind of horrifying situation, and another one and another one. It's unrelenting. And that was obviously, apparently that according to Jordan Peele, the plan for the end of Get Out was that, I always feel bad spoiling because it's such a great ending, but
Spoilers.
Spoiler alert. The protagonist does escape at the end and is sort of escaping, sort of running up this kind of like the driveway out of the house, and you see these police lights, and because of a scene that happens earlier on, you're like, oh my god, this poor guy, he almost had his brain cut out, and this weird guy's brain put into his in-laws, and it works out that they're not very nice. It works out his girlfriend didn't even want to be his girlfriend. She was just using him to sell him on later on, and now he's going to be arrested. And then it obviously works out that it's his friend who has come to save him, and it is so satisfying. And Jordan Peele said that that was originally the plan, was to have him arrested for the murder of the family, but he just felt like the audience just needed a relief, like needed someone to like,
that could have been
that. That would have made it, would have completely changed the dynamic of the film. And I think
I think the message that he was trying to get across, wasn't trying, that he was getting across, was very much embedded by that point anyway. To have, because he, like you said just then, he'd already had a run-in with the police at the beginning, where they were IDing him and they wanted to know all the information about him. You know, obviously what's been going on in America as well. So that was already in there. So yeah, to have that ending as well, that'd have been rough.
It would have left. I think it's one of those. It's a weird thing to say that you're watching a film that talks about very kind of distressing notions of racism, hints about kind of, or harking back to sort of ideas of slavery and inequality. It's hard to say that film you then come out with like relief. But like I was just so happy for him at the end. I was like, and I also like his friend Rod, I think his name is. He is such a good character, and all the way through he is like the sensible friend. Like when he's like, oh, it's really, you know, this is happening and it's really weird, and he's like, get out, like go home. And he's like, I'm just gonna hang around for a couple more days and see what it's like. And you know, I think he's like totally the voice of reason all the way through, and he's actually a very comedic character, which, you know, is quite a nice
it's a nice foil for it, isn't it?
Yeah, like it kind of it provides you with a bit of relief, I think, all the way through the film, because those are the kind of topics of like slavery and racism is so overt, it can become quite like oppressing. And the topic is, wow, you know, this idea of like playing with people's minds in a kind of hypnosis, but also in a physically cutting them out and putting someone else's brain in your body is horrifying. So yeah, I really liked it. I really like Jordan Peele. I think he's absolute one of the best directors that we've got at the moment.
He's an important director now. I think when people seen who it was that was directing it, and then how good it was, he's become a very, very important director for the messages that he's putting across now in his films. And I think the fact that he's a comedian as well really helps that, because he is, you know, comedians nowadays are more social commentaries than actual telling jokes. They hold a mirror back up to society and say, look at you, this is what, you know, this is the stupidity of society. That's what I think comedians are mostly these days. So for him as a comedian doing films like Get Out, I think it's perfect. He can put up that mirror so well, and has done it so well, especially with Get Out, which I think one of my friends who said, and I agree with him, it's probably one of the most important social commentary films since Night of the Living Dead back in the 60s. But that was talking about, again, the race relations back then. So we're talking nearly 60 years, and things that haven't really changed in the ending of Night of the Living Dead, and that was a social commentary on African Americans, white privilege, white power. Also, the Vietnam War as well. That was in the. But the ending of Night of the Living Dead was a group of white men just shooting a black guy. They didn't ask, they didn't assume, they didn't do anything. They just shot him dead, and that was the message back then. So we're talking 50, 60 years later, and we're still having these conversations. So Get Out, it really is an important film for that message.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's, on the surface, if you don't even want to look at any kind of like metaphors or anything like that, I think it's still an absolutely brilliant film. But I think that you can sort of take so much more from it if you really take the time to really kind of try and understand what the director is telling you and sharing with you, and the horror that I say this is very privileged. I say very privileged. I'm not very privileged, but as a white woman, and I am privileged in that sense. I find that horrifying to watch, but actually I think what the director is saying is that in a hyperbolic way, this is what a lot of kind of African Americans in this instance are dealing with every day. And wow, like,
but it's interesting, that scene where Chris is asked what he feels the African American experience is today, and he's like, I'm not qualified to answer that question. Why don't I ask my friend over there whose actually body was switched over? It was Andre, wasn't it?
Andre, yeah.
It was Andre, and then they ask him, and he says, "Oh, it's perfectly fine. I've enjoyed the African," but he says it in a white way. He says it in a very old white man way.
And there's definitely in it, there's definitely kind of like, I don't want to use the word mockery because that's kind of a bit loaded, but there's a bit of a joke at kind of like the kind of white middle class. There's the scene where Chris goes to like bump fists with Jordan. With Andre. Andre just grabs his fist as if to shake it, and then that's kind of in that exchange, Chris is like sort of taken aback by it because it's not something that he would expect. But all of the kind of guests at that party, they definitely kind of fit these like stereotypes of almost like the old. You look at even some of the way that they're the ways that some of them are dressed, like the old sort of plantation slave owners, like they.
Because Andre was dressed like that, wasn't he? He was dressed the straw hat in that way. And the old coat.
I also read a really interesting because in the film it comes up a couple of times about Obama. So I think in the opening scenes,
I'd have voted for Obama for a third time if he'd come in.
There was it. Rose says, "Oh, my dad always says if he would have voted Obama for a third time." And then the dad then says it later on, and that's obviously reiterating this idea that they've done this so many times. It's like scripted. But also I was reading something about the film, and they were saying about the idea of like Republicans versus Democrats, and if you look, it's only Andre and Chris who are wearing blue, and everyone else is wearing some element of red to illustrate they're like at the party anyway. And I was like, that's kind of it's quite an interesting sort of look at it. I don't know if it's actually, if they're just finding, maybe Chris had some red on that they're just choosing not to see. But yeah, I thought that was kind of an interesting look.
I read that as, I'd have voted for Obama a third time. It's just like a way of saying, I'm not racist. I'd have voted for Obama a third time, but it's like, that's not really a milestone for your saying that you're not racist. That's just a
get out of jail free card.
Yes, exactly.
They I rewatched it recently for the podcast, and I totally didn't link up. So obviously early on in the when Chris goes to the parents' house and the dad is showing him all the photos, he shows him a photo of his dad, who is kind of like the brains behind this horrible sort of science experiment. And he mentions just in passing that he was a runner and he was beaten by Jesse Owens.
Yeah.
And then later in the scene, when he's outside having a cigarette, when Chris is outside having a cigarette on his own, there's that really surreal scene where you see the gardener just running, doing like extreme fast. And I shamefully, when I first watched it, never put the two together. But obviously it works out the gardener is the grandfather. The grandfather's mind is put in the gardener's body. And that's why he's running, because he's a runner. But I never, it was only the second time I watched that, I was like, yeah, of course. And little things as well, like there's a bit where he's showing Chris, the dad is showing Chris around the house, and he says, he goes into the kitchen where the maid is, who's got the mind of the grandmother, and he makes this comment about something about his mum loved to cook, so he always likes to keep a little bit of his mum in the kitchen. And obviously the little bit of his mum is the maid.
It's his man,
because
yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, and you're like, oh, why didn't I see this the first time? Like, obviously, but it's little hints all the way through. They literally, you can, when you rewatch it, I can almost like hear Jordan Peele behind the camera going, do you get it yet? Do you get it? Like, what about this clue? Do you get it? Do you get it now? Do you get it?
Yeah.
And when you rewatch it, you're like, oh, he's telling me all the way through what is going on, and I am just missing it left, right, and centre. But yeah, I just thought it was such a standout film for 2010s, actually just the genre throughout history, that I just couldn't not talk about it in this podcast. And I'm sure lots of people will have seen it already. If they haven't, just cannot recommend
just go watch it.
Going,
yeah.
And
if you have watched it and you're listening to this now going, oh, I didn't know, see, there's all these hints, go back and watch it and you'll see them all.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
We'll end this on a little funny story. So I watched Get Out for the first time. It was 2017, wasn't it? So when it came out on DVD, so I watched it around that time. But at that weekend, I was going visiting my then girlfriend's parents for the first time. So when they offered me a cup of tea, when they offered me a cup of tea, yes, in a China cup, I was like, no, you're all right. Nah, I'm good. I'm good, thanks.
I'm fine.
I'm fine,
what
thanks.
did you say you do again?
Yeah.
It's one of those really good films that, I mean, it's so surreal in, as I was describing, I was saying, like, this sounds so weird, like what I'm saying, but when you watch it, it makes sense, it all fits in. But yeah, it's just so well played out, and it does play on you. There are definitely things about it that kind of, like you're saying, that uncanny valley, that weird way that people interact with other people. It's, it definitely stays with you. And I cannot recommend watching this film time and time again.
It is a good one. Well, that's it. So that's the 2010s. So if we're going through the decades, we've got a long time to go. So we don't know when the next one we're going to do on horror is. Next time we're going to do our next podcast, because the Oscars were this weekend, just gone.
They were.
We could have timed this up better. But anyway, we're still going to have a little bit of fun with the Oscars. We're going to do our not so Oscars films. We're going to talk about some of our favourite films that didn't watch an Oscar that we thought should have won an Oscar. I think that should be a lot of fun. That'll be in a couple of weeks. But in the meantime, if you've watched some films in the 2010s that are horror and you enjoyed, let us know. We'd really like to know. Tell us if you watched Bone Tomahawk or Get Out Again or The Kill List or whatever other films we mentioned. Let us know what you think.
If you watched Bone Tomahawk, that was on Mark's recommendation. Don't blame me. That needs to go towards Mark. I always like hearing, like I was saying at the beginning, like, I'm always on the lookout for like a really good horror film. So please do recommend and let us know your horror films of choice, because we probably haven't seen them, and I want to find the best horror film ever.
We want to know. We want to know what you think. So until next time, we'll see you soon, and enjoy the rest of your week. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Crying tonight!